Hi, I'm Cassie Burton, host of the Curiosity Junkie podcast. I want to personally thank you for taking the time to listen today. Please feel free to share your favorite episodes and don't forget to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the donate button or head over to cassieburton.com to learn more and get signed up for the monthly newsletter. Thanks again for listening and enjoy the show. Today's guest is an integrative mental health practitioner who helps you restore balance to the nervous system. Please welcome Anahita Parseghian. Hi, Anahita. Thank you so much for joining the Curiosity Junkie podcast.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. So delighted to be here.
Yes, I am excited to have an opportunity to chat with you. You do some pretty amazing modalities and a lot of different ones, but I want to dive into the integrative mental health practitioner piece of what you do first, because I'm not really sure what that is. So help me understand that.
Absolutely. So an integrative mental health practitioner essentially combines different integrative tools, very holistic approach to address mental health challenges. Much of our society and the Western model of medicine considers our bodies and our minds separate, but really we're very much intertwined. So the work of an integrative approach is about bringing all these different modalities together. We start with sleep, then we look at diet and nutrition, supplementation, fitness regimens. We look at an environment. How is our environment, whether there is sound pollution or any kind of environmental pollutions we want to address. So creating a holistic space for our nervous system to thrive. And some of that then goes into meditation, plant medicines for some individuals, if that's an option for them. Also community connection and feeling really connected, because isolation is definitely a very present challenge for our modern day societies. So really the work of an integrative mental health practitioner is bringing all these layers together with all these different tool sets to provide the best environment for our mental health to thrive.
Oh, I love it, because you hear a lot of the integrative or natural path for overall health, but not really around the mental health piece. So I love that. Let's talk a little bit about your journey to becoming a integrative mental health practitioner.
Absolutely. So my professional background for many years was in technology. I was working in software product and very creative and joyful career. I really, truly enjoyed it. At the same time, at some point in 2013, I started developing mysterious symptoms in my body. It was really healthy. I had no health challenges ever in my life. I lived a very balanced and healthy lifestyle, but somehow I started developing these really mysterious symptoms that most of them manifested in form of chronic pain. And as I went on a mission to identify what was going on, it was a 3-year long journey before I was able to identify past trauma and nervous system overwhelm to be a contributing factor to what was going on in my body. And that inspired me to take a little break to focus on healing my body, and I never went back. And so that was over 5 years ago. And since then, I found some modalities that supported me. Within 6 months, I was pain-free after leaving my corporate career. And these modalities were so effective yet so little known that I committed myself to studying them and sharing them. And that's been the journey ever since.
Yeah. And I love that. And I'm excited that you brought up trauma, because that's really, my mind has really been focused around that as I dive more and more into traditional therapy and ways to kind of heal what's going on inside, which is a lot of the past trauma I want to talk a little bit about trauma and what it is. Like, what is trauma? Because I think a lot of people think of trauma as something extremely traumatic happening, and it doesn't always have to be that.
That's very true. So
Yeah.
trauma, as Gabor Mate, and pioneer in the space, and one of my inspirations and teachers always says, is that trauma is not what happens on the outside, it's what happens inside. So it is a sense of disconnection from the self. The ancient, wisdom carriers will call it soul flight in a way. And
Oh.
so that's really how we can categorize it, is that part of ourselves becomes not accessible. And so the process by which that happens has nothing to do with what's happening outside. Two individuals can go through the exact same experience, and one of them might walk away traumatized, the other one not so much. And for various reasons, this could happen. What happens when our brain perceives an event or some information coming in as life-threatening and as something that we need to escape from, our nervous system goes into an autonomic response of fight or flight. That's our initial response. And so initially we attempt to fight or flight. And if, regardless of the circumstances, if we're able to fight or flight from that situation, we actually don't get traumatized, because that energy rises in the body, and then we get to use that energy and do something and address it. And it closes the loop of the event. But if we continue that effort and it does not resolve and the threat continues, then often we fall into a state of freeze, a dorsal state, we call. And so in that state, it's a state of hopelessness. And again, our nervous system is designed to do that because we can't continuously exert that fight and flight energy, especially if the threat persists. So as a result, we go into that dormant dorsal state, and that is that state of trauma, is that inability to fight or flight drops us into that state of dorsal, which is associated with hopelessness, detachment, disconnection, depression. And so we don't get to use that energy, and that also gets stuck in our bodies. That energy that got built up and we didn't get to use it for our fight or flight then shows up sometimes in form of tension and stress, often in shoulder and lower back. That's sometimes associated with trauma, but not always. The trauma, really, the threat doesn't matter. It's how I felt inside. So if I felt my life was threatened and that there was no way out, that part of my nervous system moved into that state of dorsal. And often we get stuck there without even knowing.
Yes. And then like you were saying, two people can go through the same experience. Is it past experience for the brain, like it's recalling something similar that for that person would make it more life-threatening? Or like, how does that work because I'm assuming it's happening in the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's a couple layers to this. We have this concept of neurodiversity, meaning that we each have a different nervous system. Neurodiversity is not necessarily associated with pathology. It's just some of us are morning birds and some of us are, night owls. And that's kind of the most common way of understanding neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is also associated with, how we grow up and, our past experiences, our socioeconomic status, all of that impacts our neurodiversity, meaning how we respond to certain stimuli in our environment.
Right.
And some of that also informs what we call neuroception. And so there is perception, which is what we perceive. Neuroception is all this other non-cognitive information that our nervous system collects from the environment. And that's before we can actually process it in our brain. So a lot of time neuroception is just how our nervous system, how our body is responding to the stimuli around us. And so and that can be informed by past experiences, by transgenerational trauma, by illness. So there are different ways that our neuroception is impacted. And some of us have a more sensitive neuroception, where that information that's coming in is more often associated with threat. And whereas others might have different experiences and grown up with a lot of regulating resources, parents who taught them how to find their balance and their center, Whereas if we did not grow up with those tools, we will then be more likely to have a really strong reaction. But like I also said, the second part of this is just the ability to fight or flight. And so some people might have the ability to fight or flight, and that results into completing that loop of the experience. Whereas if we don't have that option, then we do get traumatized.
Right. You brought up okay, I don't even know what it was.
Transgenerational trauma.
Thank you. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's not something I think traditionally we think about. Our parents and their parents have been through traumatic experiences, and then it does kind of trickle down.
Absolutely. Science has actually demonstrated that trauma changes our DNA structure, and that can get passed on from generation to generation. Most clearly, it happens in the womb. If the mother is traumatized, and then the child will carry some of that in their nervous system. But there's also quite a bit of evidence. There was some research done on Holocaust survivors and noticing certain trends of certain types of illnesses that are associated with autoimmune conditions and nervous system overwhelm to be much more prevalent in those communities that were direct descendants of individuals that went through the Holocaust or survived the Holocaust.
Wow. Okay. So if it can be passed down, can it also be released, worked through? Is there a way to kind of let that go?
Absolutely. And I think some of that is nature and nurture. And so the nature part of that, we don't have a lot of control over, but the nurture part we do. So if you take an individual that their family lineage has gone through slavery, has gone through Holocaust, then they have a unique predisposition to be prone to going into a state of overwhelm more readily. But if we create conditions on the outside that nurture and support resilience and train and teach self-regulation and create a safe environment, then it is less likely that will happen, which is why it's so important for us to acknowledge our histories and acknowledge the impact of those histories on vulnerable populations and do the work to address this and create an environment for everyone to thrive, because ultimately the health of our society is dependent on the health of each individual.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And it is amazing how connected we really are to everything and everyone. And I don't think we really conceive how big that is. So yes, healing each individual is a big undertaking. We have a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it really just starts on a personal level, is really supporting and providing access to individuals to learn the techniques and the skill sets to really balance and regulate their nervous system. I'm a firm believer that as our world continues to change so quickly, that this is a critical skill that must be taught in schools. It is a critical life skill that will support our public health, our individual health, as a society, to be able to find the states of balance and regulation first within ourselves. And again, there's two layers to this, how we regulate our nervous system, and they're not independent of each other. And this is kind of the medicine of it that brings some of the Eastern philosophies and the Western philosophies together. Eastern philosophies being more associated with community and a sense of connectedness, and where these cultures do a really good job of co-regulation, helping each other find balance and center. Whereas the Western society does a really good job of training people in self-regulation and personal responsibility. But really the medicine is in bringing them together, because there is no separation. We need both of those. We need personal strategies to stay balanced and regulated, and we need strategies to regulate together. And I'll add one more thing, is that self-regulation's foundation is in co-regulation. So this is why Eastern societies tend to do better, even though they don't have a lot of focus on the self when it comes to regulating and having a more balanced nervous system, whereas Western societies put so much of that attention and responsibility on the individual, and that ignores the fact that really the foundation of our self-regulation is co-regulation. If we didn't learn that in childhood from our parents, if our parents weren't there to hug us and assure us and support us, and that community wasn't there for us, then we are less likely to be able to do that on our own later on. So it's really important to understand that these two are really intertwined and we need both.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the family piece again, because I do think just in everything I'm learning on this journey, my healing journey, is that it really starts young. And if we as parents, I mean, yes, we have to heal ourselves first, but then if we can start teaching our children and their children, even younger, how to self-regulate and co-regulate, which I didn't realize was such a big thing, because I hear a lot about self-regulation in almost all, like you're saying, the Western side of therapy is all about self-regulation, which I think is important too. But then the co-regulation piece, I hadn't really even considered how important that was.
Yes, I mean, that's really about our culture that really is at this point is critical for us to go through that change and that awakening that we're all connected and we are communal creatures by nature. And we can't impose cultural frameworks that deny us that communal level of support. And I think, I can't help but notice that this last year and a half of us going through this very, in a way, a lot of times we can look at it from perspective of divisive time, but I really see this connecting because we're connected in our struggle. Yeah. And, if a group goes through a challenge together, they are much more bonded. And this is how a lot of trainings and group settings happen in the Army and the Marine Corps. Is like really a lot of that is about the entire group working together. And so in those conditions, when we're trying to cultivate resiliency, the group element is really important. So moving through a challenging experience as a group can be a very uniting factor. And I think it's blurring those lines between the haves and the have-nots and the different races and the religions. When we have a communal experience, we're all moving through, that's really challenging, hopefully bringing us closer together, recognizing that we actually need each other, we need to support each other, and that through isolation, no matter how many resources we have available, if you spend the last 18 months sitting at home on your own, even with all the resources that was available to you, your mental health is definitely struggling. So we need each other for sure.
Yeah. And I hadn't thought about that piece, that we have all been through this together. So if nothing else, we have a universal, relatable experience that we can all share and talk about. I love that. I hadn't really looked at it in that way.
Treasures of COVID.
The benefits. Yeah. See, there's always I hate to call it a silver lining, but there's always a positive way to look at something if you get curious.
There you go.
Let's talk about some of the modalities that you use, because I know there are a lot of different practices out there, and you do quite a few and integrate them kind of all together. So I was so excited to find you and everything that you do. So let's talk about a few of those.
Surely. So my modality, as I mentioned, is very holistic. It addresses the body, the mind, and the spirit. I take a very bottom-up approach. As a somatic trauma therapist, my work is very much start with the body and then address whatever is left. So first we attempt to bring balance to the body, and it's a multifaceted approach with the body. It's first and foremost really is healing the nervous system, and that involves ideal sleep patterns and diet and fitness. And so these are the simple things a lot of people know about, but it's also healing the nervous system through releasing this old tension and trauma that's stored in our bodies through somatic means, and resourcing in each individual to be able to better regulate their nervous system out of states of overwhelm, and not only do that, but be able to be that force of regulation and balance for people around them. So once we bring balance to the nervous system, a lot of the conditions that Western medicine tends to treat as symptoms: anxiety, depression, insomnia, fatigue, memory loss, chronic pain, digestive disorders. These are all tied to nervous system overwhelm and stress. And if we can really successfully address the nervous system overwhelm and really resource the individual, then we see a lot of those conditions flutter away. And sometimes there is a little bit of that still present once the body and the nervous system is balanced. That's because our brains tend to really like old ways of being and familiarity. So we tend to cycle through negative thoughts and emotions and patterns and traumas and memories of the past, which then can also throw the nervous system back into out of balance. And so it's really required that first we address the body. And a lot of times when we address the body, something like 60-70% of the symptoms do resolve. And then we look at the mind and notice what's there. Now, in traditional psychotherapy, which definitely there is benefit to that, there is medicine to that, there's really times that it's really, really supportive to have that somebody else listen to you, hear you out. A lot of times that alone helps. And so, but at the same time, when it comes to trauma, it is really challenging to do this work through psychotherapy means, because trauma memory is not really reliable. And what we found that if every time we access memory, it changes a little bit. And so there's a little bit of suggestibility as well. And it can also be re-traumatizing, going back and reviewing those memories. So the work on the cognitive front, a lot of time, is identifying those old trauma survival patterns that we're holding in our mindset. I work with a framework called positive intelligence. And in that framework, we'll look to see what are the different adaptations to trauma that we've taken on as our persona and personality. So the example I give is that imagine you were 4 years old and you fell and broke your leg and it was hurting so bad, couldn't do anything. And then somebody handed you a crutch. And that crutch worked really well. You were able to move around, have less pain, and be more active and do some of the things that you really loved. But that crutch was so effective for you that you start believing that it's your third leg. And so a lot of times we take that on as our identity, that survival, which happens really early on in childhood, and then we replay that in adulthood. And a lot of times people will come to me in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they can't figure out why all the effort that they're putting towards their dreams and goals and health is not panning out. And at the end of the day, we find that, hey, you're trying to run a marathon with a crutch that belongs to a 4-year-old, and it really doesn't help. And so this is where we go and identify those patterns that are present in the present today. And we work slowly through neural reprogramming models to address those patterns and reprogram them towards a more positive and healthy brain. That's kind of the cognitive front, the mind front. And the last bit is the spirit front, is that, we've so disconnected. We're so disconnected from our natural self, from our connection to environment, our connection to each other. And we don't recognize that much of, our sadness that we can't really explain. A lot of times it's because of our disconnection from nature and from the true essence of community, of ancestors, of prayers, of connection. So the spirit part of this is really about reconnecting to ourselves through meditative practices, through rituals. Rituals are also a great container for us to hold our practices, for us to hold our alignment and our create an environment where we can thrive. And so that ritual provides that environment and that container for us to integrate all the layers of the body and the mind that we've learned, and then give it a nice little, even if it's a 15-20 minute mindfulness meditation or a prayer in the evening, it's just having a little container that connects us back to our spirit, our ancestors, the earth, and our own bodies. And that's kind of the other layer of it. And so that's the overall approach. And some modalities that support those approaches. I work with trauma release exercises, which is a somatic trauma therapy model designed to teach each individual how to turn on neurogenic involuntary shakes in their body as a way of discharging that tension, stress, and trauma from the nervous system. I work with Safe and Sound Protocol, which is a sound-based therapy model designed to heal the middle ear structure. This one's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, I haven't heard of this.
So we found, and this is new, we found that in response to trauma, our middle ear, which is the smallest muscle in the body, goes into a permanent state of dysfunction. And it does so to protect us. Everything that our nervous system does is to protect us. It's protecting us. And what it does, it starts to prioritize lower frequency sound over high frequency sounds. Low frequency sounds are associated with predatory sounds. High frequency sounds are associated with safety and calm and human speech. And so when the middle ear goes into dysfunction, we start hearing predatory sounds louder. So a lot of times we don't actually recognize that, oh my God, why am I so sensitive to sound all of a sudden? Why are sirens bothering me? Why are the rumbles bothering me? Why are certain loud noises bothering me? It's because the middle ear is literally making you hear those sounds louder than the regulating calming sounds. But not only that, because the middle ear is in the face and there's a lot of nerves in the face, it touches upon our optic nerves. So we develop sound light sensitivity. A lot of individuals with high nervous system activation have a lot of sensitivity to bright lights. Sometimes it also impacts our sense of smell or taste. Certain smells or tastes will have an extremely intense reaction. Our ability to swallow is impacted a lot of times. So this therapy model is designed to heal those layers through just simply healing the middle ear structure by just listening to sound, which is just incredible. I also
it's
work
amazing
with,
too. I hate to interrupt, but it's amazing.
By all means.
You said it's simple by simply listening to music. And that's what I think is the most amazing part as I discover all of these healing modalities. Yes, you do need to work with someone who knows how to do them correctly. But then once you kind of have that training, it is something you can kind of do on your own, and they are fairly simple. You just need to be taught the correct way to do them. So that's why I like therapy, because I think we do have to talk through things, but a lot of these modalities that really help release trapped trauma, tension, stress, whatever you want to call it, are fairly simple, which I'm just blown away by.
Absolutely. It's incredible. This is why I do the work I do, is because each individual can be fully empowered to become their own healers of their own nervous system. Yeah. Every single individual is capable of doing that. Now, a lot of times it takes some work, if there's a lot of trauma, for us to be able to just find safety in our bodies, to be able to then work from that. The safety is non-negotiable foundation for everything that we do. And so in those circumstances, individuals need a therapist to find that safety. But really, the medicine of all of these practices is that once you learn how to do this, you can do this on your own, and you can create a little ritual and incorporate that into your day-to-day life. What's fascinating is that these days there's so many incredible advancements in technology that we can do this not through intuition or just personal experience, but we can do this through data. So this is a lot of times what I work with is a biofeedback system, where we look at how your heart rate variability is responding to a therapy model, how your sleep is changing, and how your breathing is changing. And those start to give us the cues of what's really working for your nervous system. Because like I said, we have different nervous system, different cultural references. Not every therapy works for every person, but amongst the selection of therapies, this is why integrative is so wonderful, is that you have all this kind of buffet of experiences, and then you get to see, oh, wow, that's working for me. I'm going to integrate that. That's not working for me. Okay, I'm not going to integrate that, because we can get overwhelmed. There's so many modalities out there. So to find like the 2, 3, I always tell my clients, find the 1, 2, 3 things that are best supporting you. Just focus on integrating those.
Mm-hmm. Yes. When you say rituals, are you talking about like implementing and starting a routine of some of the practices, modalities, along with something else? Or like I journal, and I don't really know if I call it meditation, but I have a meditative moment with music, and then I journal and I do some gratitude work as well. I call that a ritual.
So ritual is less about what and it's more about the intention that we bring in. And so, my beauty regimen of the evening can be a ritual if I'm really bringing in my spirit experience and my intention, and I'm really not just like, oh, I'm just have to do this, but I absolutely just have to be in that space and be present and bring spirit, bring intention, because we're learning more and more as the science grows, but we're recognizing the power of our intention. Yeah. And if we come into, I can light a candle and move on, or I can light a candle and say even one word of prayer, and now that container is different. And so a lot of ritual is around creating intentional containers to connect with ourselves, to connect with the earth, to connect with spirit. And you can do that in many ways. You could do it through dancing, through intimacy, through beauty rituals, through the food. And like, I sing to my food when I'm cooking, and that creates a ritual.
I love that. When I'm cleaning my vegetables, I talk to them and thank them. It's wonderful though. And it's the simple things like that can change the dynamic of your internal system.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a connection to spirit. And that's kind of the lost art of our time, is that connection to spirit, and how we get to incorporate that in our day-to-day life. And it seems to be the big loss of our modern life, is that disconnection. And if we can create more of that, then we can truly benefit from it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, and I'm not really familiar if you have courses or events that you do. I would love to share that if you have anything coming up.
Absolutely. I'll be delighted to. I actually just launched my annual group online training. It's called Resilience Toolbox, and it starts end of October. Registration is now open, and this training is essentially designed to empower each individual to become their own healers and give them the tools that they need to stay healthy and balanced, and not only for themselves, but also be a force of good for others. And so in this training, it's really designed for frankly, really a lot of people can benefit from this. If you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed in the last 18 months, it feels like everybody has at this point.
Say, who hasn't?
Levels of anxiety, burnout, depression, fatigue, chronic pain, insomnia, all these stress-induced conditions are really rooted in the nervous system. So this course is designed to, one, train each individual the full comprehensive training for trauma release method, so that they can have a home practice and incorporate that in their regimen of wellness and balance. We're also going to cover polyvagal theory, which is an emergent understanding of our autonomic nervous system. And it's a critical lens, in my opinion. Once we see it, we can't unsee it. Once we start really seeing ourselves and our thoughts, emotions, and responses from that framework, and I can each moment look at it and say, oh, well, I am noticing this thought or this emotion, and it's associated with this state. And if that's a state of imbalance, then we resource each individual to find their way back into a state of balance from each of those different states. And if we are in state of balance, how do I stay there? So what are the glimmers that help me stay there? What are the triggers that pull me out of there? And how do I find my way back? And that finding the way back, we call that vagal toning, which is associated with vagus nerve, our 10th craniosacral nerve. When it's stimulated, it completely resets our heart rate and calms our entire nervous system. And so by training individuals in a safe container to go in and out of these states of balance and imbalance, we're practicing what we call the vagal break. How do I go back and forth? And the more I practice doing that, it's kind of, again, I want to bring that military training example here, because that's what it is that, that practice of combat. And so it's the practice of combat for a nervous system, learning how to back and forth so that when the moment presents itself, I am resourced, I can tap into my tools, and I can find my way back into a state of balance. The last bit of that polyvagal training is about identifying and mapping out our resources, things that I can do on my own to stay in a state of balance or find my way back to a state of balance, and also things I can do with other people to stay in balance and also find my way back into a state of balance. And once we see this, it's really about safety. At the end of the day, like I said, it's all about safety, recognizing that if we're not feeling safe in a state of ventral, we call in our nervous system, safe, socially engaged, feeling connected to the world, then we're actually not capable of solving problems. We're not effective. We're not impactful. And a lot of times it feels like these days there's so much disagreements and fighting and righteousness. And although I understand some of these narratives and the passion behind them, at the same time, I always, I pose the question, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And if you want to be effective, then the number one thing we want to do is bring ourselves and the other individual to a state of ventral safety, connection, engagement, and then have conversations from that place. But what are we doing? We're having conversations from the state of activation and nobody's listening to anybody. So we're exerting all this life force energy and it doesn't do anything. It doesn't move the needle. So if we want to be effective leaders, effective educators, effective parents, we want to have the capacity to do that. It's something that our society needs as a whole, but it will probably take some time. That's why I'm doing this work one-on-one and hoping to activate each individual to be inspired with that lens.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. And is that a course that someone can sign up for, and it's self, you can do it yourself, or is it live or?
Yeah, so it's a live online group course. We do this on Zoom, and the sessions happen once a week, 90-minute sessions. There's a little workbook each individual takes home, and it's very limited in space because, the TRE practice is the bulk of this training, and it is a very physical experience. People are on mats and moving, and they have to do it right. So I'm one individual, and that's the maximum number of people I can hold is 17 people in that space. Right. And so people come and there's 17 participants, and each individual does this practice at home. At the beginning, it's a bit more, heavy lifting, but by the time we reach the 4th week, people are pretty fluid with their practices. And that's when we introduce other content that helps us really integrate that material.
Right. Okay. And it has started, or what is the start date?
Right now, the registration is open, starts on October 26th. It goes through December 14th. And people can sign up on my website at Anahita, ANAHITA.com. It's there. You can check it out. You can sign up. I'm offering early bird pricing until October 1st. I'm also offering some bonuses for bringing your friend along, because everybody needs to learn this. So do your friend a favor and bring them along.
Right. No, I love that. Okay. Exciting. And I will put your information in the description on all the podcast platforms, the YouTube, and then if I can get it to run across the bottom of the screen, I will do that for everyone as well.
Wonderful.
Yes. Well, I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up. Thank you so much. There's so much to this, and that's one of the reasons I do this. I just want to share when I find someone doing amazing things, and you really are, because you're doing so many different things in a bigger picture. I just think it's wonderful.
Thank you, dear. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for tuning in, listening, watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you soon. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the subscribe button to follow us and receive new episodes each week. If you really enjoy the podcast and you're feeling generous, please hit the donate button. We work hard to create original content and keep the podcast ad-free.